You're not in our HOA? That's impossible. Linda McAllister's voice cut through the morning air like a blade as she stared me down, her hands planted firmly on her hips. I've lived here for 5 years, and I know every inch of this neighborhood. You can't just opt out. That was the moment it all started. I wasn't just any guy. I wasn't some clueless newbie who didn't know the rules. I wasn't even a regular homeowner. I was about to show Linda exactly who she was dealing with. The name's Jason Turner, and I don't back down easily. I moved here to Willowbrook Estates to get away from the chaos, to find peace. I'm a lawyer, used to navigating complicated contracts and complex legal jargon. But here I was, facing down an HOA president who thought she could tell me what to do with my life. I wasn't a fan of the HOA from the start. Who would be? These people, with their pristine lawns and their constant surveillance, had a way of making you feel like you were never good enough. Linda was the worst of them all. She'd been the HOA president for years, and she had this way of making everyone feel like they owed her something. So when I moved in, I was determined to do things my way. I didn't want to be involved in their petty rules or regulations. I wasn't interested in their neighborhood standards. So I told Linda I wasn't part of their HOA. And that's when she snapped. The HOA? You're not in our HOA. Then why are you here? She demanded, narrowing her eyes as though she had caught me in some sort of lie. I stayed calm. I had nothing to hide. I'm not in your HOA, I repeated, and I don't plan on joining. I'm just here to live my life in peace, like anyone else. But Linda didn't like that. She didn't like it one bit. You can't just ignore the rules, she spat, her voice rising. If you're going to live here, you follow the rules. I knew what was coming next. She was going to pull the legal card, the one that HOA presidents always pull when they think they have the upper hand. And sure enough, she did. I'm calling the cops, she said, turning on her heel and walking briskly toward her house. We'll see what they have to say about your rules then. I watched her go, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. I had nothing to worry about. But what Linda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I wasn't just another homeowner. I wasn't some powerless resident she could push around. No, I was Jason Turner, and I had just inherited the land she thought she controlled. She had no idea that I was, in fact, the new landlord of Willowbrook Estates. When the cops showed up, they weren't here to intimidate me. They were here to hear me tell Linda exactly who was in charge now. They just didn't know it yet. You really think you can just ignore the HOA? Linda's voice echoed in the still morning air as she glared at me from the front of her house. I'm calling the cops, Jason. This won't end well for you. I didn't flinch. I didn't even flinch when the cop car rolled up minutes later, its sirens barely audible over the hum of my thoughts. I could already picture how this was going to go. Linda was going to pull the whole "I'm in charge" act, and I was just supposed to roll over and accept it. But that's not how I operate. The officer, Officer Collins, stepped out of the car. A tall, broad-shouldered guy with a no-nonsense vibe. He had that typical small-town cop look. Tough, but approachable. You the one causing the disturbance? He asked, glancing at Linda. Disturbance? Hardly. I said calmly, shaking my head. I'm just a guy trying to live in peace. This woman, I nodded toward Linda, has a problem with me not joining the HOA, and now she's calling the cops like it's some kind of crime. Officer Collins looked from me to Linda, clearly processing the situation. Is that true, ma'am? He asked, and I could see Linda's smile tighten. Well, not exactly, Linda began, her tone dripping with condescension. But he's refusing to follow the community rules. He needs to pay his dues, be part of the association. If not, he's disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. The officer raised an eyebrow, his gaze never leaving Linda. Ma'am, you know the rules of the HOA are voluntary, right? Linda blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? It's a community standard. He has to, actually. I interjected, cutting her off with a calm confidence that had taken years of practice to perfect. I don't have to do anything. I'm not part of your HOA. And, in case you missed it, I just bought this entire property. The officer turned toward me with an expression that said, Go on. I own the land. I continued, my voice steady. Every inch of it, including the streets and houses that Linda seems to think she's in charge of. You see, I just inherited this place, and when I did, I took a look at the paperwork. Turns out, I own the whole damn neighborhood. Officer Collins paused for a second, then looked back at Linda, his face a mix of confusion and realization. You didn't know this? He asked. Linda's face turned a shade paler, but she quickly regained her composure. This is ridiculous. You can't just… Actually, I said, cutting her off again. I'm your new landlord. I own the entire subdivision, Linda, including this street. And you know what that means? I'm the one who makes the rules now, not you. There was a long silence. Linda stood there, her mouth open but no words coming out. Officer Collins looked between the two of us, clearly unsure how to respond. Finally, he turned back to Linda, his tone softer but firm. Ma'am, it seems like you're the one who needs to understand the rules. If Mr. Turner is indeed the owner of this land, then it looks like you're the one who's out of line here. Linda opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. It was clear she was in shock. She thought she was in charge. She thought she could push people around, control the neighborhood. But now, she was the one who was powerless. As Officer Collins finished taking my statement, he gave Linda one last glance before shaking his head. You need to get your facts straight, ma'am. I'm not sure how you got it in your head that you could control someone else's property, but it's time to let go of that illusion. And just like that, the tables turned. Linda was speechless, defeated. She realized, a little too late, that she had underestimated me. The HOA wasn't her kingdom anymore. This was my land now. And from now on, the rules would be mine to make. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. After that confrontation with Linda and the police, word spread fast around Willowbrook Estates. People were talking, and I could hear snippets of conversation every time I walked out my front door. Did you hear? Jason Turner owns the whole neighborhood now. It was almost comical how quickly things changed. I had gone from just another guy trying to avoid HOA drama to the new kingpin of Willowbrook. But it wasn't just the neighbors who were talking. Linda was furious. I could practically hear her seething from a mile away. She'd never expected this. The woman who had practically ruled the neighborhood for years was now powerless, and I was the one holding all the cards. The HOA board had scheduled a meeting, and I knew what it was about. They were going to try to take me down, to fight back against the new reality that I had just thrown into their faces. But what they didn't know was that I was prepared for this. I had spent the last few days digging into every piece of documentation I could find. Property records, tax documents, anything I could use to prove that I not only owned the land, but that they had no legal right to challenge my authority. The night before the HOA meeting, I sat down with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rachel. She was the kind of lawyer who didn't waste time with pleasantries. We've got them cornered, Jason, she said, flipping through the documents. Their only play now is to claim you didn't follow proper procedures, but based on these records, they're in the wrong. We can shut them down before they even get started. I smiled. It felt good to be on the other side of things for once. To be the one holding the power, not the one being pushed around. The next day, I walked into the HOA meeting like I was strolling into my own courtroom. Linda was sitting at the head of the table, her face a mixture of frustration and disbelief. She had clearly been trying to rally the troops, but I could tell by the look in her eyes that she was starting to realize the game was over. I took a seat at the far end of the table, my lawyer sitting beside me. The rest of the board members shuffled in, all trying to act like they still had control. Linda cleared her throat. We're here to discuss Mr. Turner's refusal to comply with our HOA's rules and regulations, she began, her voice shaky, but still trying to sound authoritative. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. Actually, Linda, I said, this meeting is a waste of time. I'm the one who owns this land, and you're the one who's been breaking the rules for years. The room went silent. Linda's face turned red, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. She had been expecting a fight, but not like this. I opened up my binder of documents and placed it on the table with a deliberate thud. I've gone through the records, I continued, and everything I've found says that the HOA has no legal grounds to enforce these rules on me or anyone else in this neighborhood. I turned the pages, showing them the evidence. Proof that the property had been mismanaged. Proof that the rules Linda had been so insistent on were not legally enforceable. I could see the board members exchanging nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. Linda, however, wasn't going down without a fight. This is absurd, she snapped. You can't just buy your way into our community and change everything. I stood up, my voice calm but firm. Actually, I can. And I just did. Rachel stood beside me, her confidence radiating as she addressed the board. We have every right to challenge the HOA's actions. And if necessary, we'll take this to court. But I can assure you, you're going to lose. The board members looked at each other, and I could see the fight drain out of them. Linda's face twisted with frustration, but there was nothing she could do. The tables had turned, and now, it was her turn to be on the losing side. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. No one said much, and Linda didn't look at me again. I could feel the weight of the situation lift off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. I had won, and Willowbrook Estates was finally mine. The days after the HOA meeting were quiet, almost too quiet. The air around Willowbrook Estates seemed to have shifted. People were no longer whispering behind their doors, and Linda had stopped walking around with that air of superiority she once wore so proudly. I could see the change in her face every time we crossed paths. She no longer had the authority she thought she did. For the first time since moving here, the weight of being the new landlord of Willowbrook settled comfortably on my shoulders. It wasn't the kind of power that made you strut around. No, it was the kind of quiet power that changed the way people treated you, the kind that left them wondering if they had made a mistake underestimating you. I knew Linda and the other members of the HOA board weren't going to let this go easily. They'd already tried to rally the neighbors, stirring up fear about the changes I was planning to make. But I wasn't here to play their game. I was here to make this community a place people actually wanted to live, not a place that was ruled by petty rules and unreasonable expectations. I spent the next few weeks finalizing the changes I had in mind. I brought in a team of experts, architects, legal advisors, and even a few local community leaders to help me overhaul the entire way the neighborhood was run. My first big decision? Revoking all the absurd HOA fees that had been tacked on for years. Those were the kind of fees that made no sense, the ones that people paid just to keep the peace. I wanted to end that nonsense. No more fines for trivial things. No more HOA inspectors, with rulers to measure how tall your grass was. I had bigger plans for Willowbrook Estates. It wasn't going to be the cookie-cutter, over-regulated community that Linda had tried to shape. This was going to be a place where families could thrive, not just follow someone else's rules. I held a community meeting at the local park to lay everything out. I wanted everyone to hear it from me, not through rumors or Linda's twisted version of events. As I stood in front of the group, I could see the nervous faces in the crowd, unsure of what to expect. Linda was nowhere to be found. It was almost as if she was avoiding me, and that made me smile. Folks, I began, my voice calm but firm. I know the last few weeks have been unsettling for some of you. Change isn't easy, but I believe it's time for a fresh start here in Willowbrook. I'm not here to take over your lives. I'm here to give you the freedom you've been missing. The crowd was silent, waiting for me to continue. I've looked at everything, the rules, the fines, the fees, and I'm ending all of it. From now on, no more rules for the sake of rules. I'm putting the power back in your hands, not some HOA presidents. There were murmurs in the crowd, some of them nodding, others unsure. But don't get me wrong, I added, there will be new rules. Rules that make sense. Rules that help keep this place beautiful, but that allow you to live your lives without fear of being fined for every little thing. We're going to have community events, improvements to the park, and even a say in how things are run. This is your neighborhood now, just as much as it is mine. I paused, letting the words sink in. I'm not just the landlord. I'm your neighbor, and I'm here to make sure we all live well together. As I finished, I could feel the energy in the crowd shift. People were beginning to understand. They were starting to realize that the fear they'd lived with for so long, the fear of being watched, of being controlled, was finally over. The meeting ended with a round of applause, and for the first time since I moved in, I felt like I belonged here. Willowbrook Estates wasn't Linda's domain anymore. It was mine, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. Weeks passed, and things in Willowbrook Estates began to settle into a new rhythm. The changes I had promised were slowly taking shape. People were starting to enjoy the new sense of freedom, and I could see the relief on their faces every time we met at the park or around the neighborhood. The tension that had once hung in the air was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of camaraderie. It felt like we were all in this together now. But not everyone was happy. Linda McAllister still hadn't come to terms with the fact that I was in charge now. She had tried to rally the board members to go against me, but I wasn't worried. The truth was, Linda didn't have the power she once thought she had. I was the one who controlled the land now, and that meant I was the one who made the rules. One afternoon, While I was working on some paperwork in my office, I got a call from Rachel. "Jason, you might want to brace yourself," she said, her tone serious. "Linda's been stirring up trouble again. She's trying to get a group of residents to sign a petition to reverse everything you've put in place." I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping against the desk. It didn't surprise me. Linda had been plotting something ever since the HOA meeting. "What's her plan?" I asked, already knowing it wouldn't be a simple petition. "She's organizing a protest," Rachel replied. "She wants to gather a group of homeowners and march to your property, demanding you reinstate the old rules. She thinks she can scare you into giving in." I let out a short laugh. "Well, if that's her big move, she's in for a disappointment. Let her march. I'll be ready." The next day, as I walked to the front of my house, I saw a group of people gathering at the end of the street. I recognized a few of them from the neighborhood, but most of them were unfamiliar faces, probably recruited by Linda. They were holding signs that read things like, "Bring back our HOA," and "Stop the chaos." Linda was at the front, standing tall with that same air of authority she'd always had. She saw me walking toward her and smiled, as if she thought this was the moment she would win. I stopped a few feet away from her, my arms crossed. "Linda," I said calmly, "I see you've gathered a crowd. What's the point of all this?" She stepped forward, her voice loud and forceful. "This isn't just about you, Jason. This is about the future of this neighborhood. You've torn it apart, and now we're here to put it back together." I could hear the anger in her voice, but there was something else too. Fear. She knew she was losing control, and it was starting to show. "Linda," I said, "this is your last chance. You can either accept the changes or keep fighting, but I'm not going to back down. This neighborhood is better off without the restrictions you wanted to impose. The people here are happy with the way things are now." The protesters around her shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to make of the situation. Linda's face reddened, but she didn't back down. "You can't just take over, Jason. This was never your place to rule." I took a step forward, my voice steady and confident. "Actually, it is. I'm the one who owns this land. You're the one who's out of place." Linda's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually do something drastic. But instead, she just stood there, speechless. The crowd behind her began to disperse, realizing they weren't going to get the fight they had been expecting. As they left, I turned to Rachel, who had been standing quietly by my side the whole time. "Looks like it's over, huh?" I said with a small smile. "Yeah," she replied. "It's finally over. You've won." And just like that, it was done. Linda's protests had failed, and the rest of Willowbrook Estates finally understood that the power had shifted. There were no more petty rules or fines. No more watching over each other's shoulders. It was my neighborhood now, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. Months passed since that day, and Willowbrook Estates was beginning to feel like a community again. The tension from the past had been replaced with a sense of calm, a sense of belonging. I could walk down the street now without feeling eyes on my back. People waved, smiled, and for the first time since I moved in, I felt like I wasn't just passing through. I was home. Linda had disappeared from the scene. She no longer walked around the neighborhood, no longer attended community events. It was like she had vanished into thin air, and truthfully, no one seemed to miss her. The board members who once rallied behind her had fallen silent, retreating to their homes with their tails tucked between their legs. They knew they had lost. But as peaceful as things seemed, I could tell that not everyone was ready to move on. The first few weeks had been the easy part. The real challenge was maintaining the new way of life. I had made promises to the residents, and I intended to keep every single one. My goal was simple: to make Willowbrook Estates a place where people didn't feel suffocated by rules, where they could raise their families in peace. It wasn't going to be perfect, but it would be ours. I spent the next few months overseeing projects that would truly make the neighborhood shine. New park benches, a small community garden where people could grow their own vegetables, and a renovated clubhouse for events and gatherings. These weren't just improvements. They were symbols of a new beginning. But the real work was with the residents themselves. I wanted to make sure they felt like they had a voice. That's why I held regular meetings, not the kind where one person talks and everyone else just listens. These were interactive, where everyone had a say. It didn't matter if you had lived here for 10 years or 10 days. If you had an idea, it was welcome. Slowly but surely, people started to open up. I saw families playing together in the park, neighbors chatting by the community garden, and for the first time in a long while, Willowbrook felt alive. I knew I couldn't undo all the damage Linda and the old board had done, but I was making a dent. People were starting to believe in something better. One afternoon, I ran into Rachel while walking my dog down the street. "Hey," she said with a grin. "I wanted to thank you for all the changes you've made. The neighborhood feels different. Feels like we're actually a community now." I smiled back at her, feeling a sense of pride. "It's not just me," I said. "It's everyone. We're all in this together." Rachel nodded. "Still, I've got to hand it to you. You've managed to do what most people thought was impossible. You turned Willowbrook around." I shrugged, brushing it off. "It's just about doing what's right. No one deserves to feel like they're living in a dictatorship." As I stood there talking to Rachel, I realized how far we had come. Just a few months ago, I had been a stranger in a neighborhood that was controlled by fear and oppression. Now, I was part of something bigger, something that was growing and changing for the better. The winds of change had blown through Willowbrook Estates, and it wasn't stopping anytime soon. It had been nearly a year since I took control of Willowbrook Estates, and things had finally started to feel normal, or at least as normal as things could get after everything that had happened. The community was thriving, residents were happier, and I could finally breathe without feeling like I was walking on eggshells. But I knew this peace wouldn't last forever. Change always came with its challenges. The HOA was gone, and that made life a lot easier for everyone. But some of the old attitudes were still lingering. There were a few residents who just couldn't let go of the past. I didn't mind it at first. People needed time to adjust. But I started noticing small things. Grumbles about the lack of structure, complaints about the new community garden taking up too much space, even a few residents mentioning that they missed the old rules. I knew it would take time for people to fully embrace the new way of living, but I wasn't about to let anyone drag us backward. One evening, I was walking back from the park, taking in the quiet beauty of the neighborhood, when I saw a familiar face standing by the community garden. It was John, one of the longtime residents, someone who had always kept to himself. He was staring at the garden with a frown on his face. "Hey, John," I called, waving as I approached him. "What's up?" He turned and gave me a tight smile. "Just thinking, Jason. You know, the garden's nice and all, but it takes up a lot of space. The old HOA wouldn't have allowed something like this." I raised an eyebrow. "You really miss those old rules?" He looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "I'm just saying, it feels like things are getting out of hand. I don't mind the changes, but sometimes I think maybe we need a little more structure." I sighed, not sure how to respond. John wasn't the first person to voice concerns like this, but it stung coming from him. He had always seemed like someone who could adapt, someone who appreciated the freedom the new system offered. "I get it," I said finally, trying to keep my voice calm. "But structure isn't about controlling people, John. It's about finding a balance, giving everyone the freedom to live how they want, but also ensuring that we don't lose sight of what makes Willowbrook special. This garden, for example, isn't just about taking up space. It's about bringing people together, about creating a place where families can grow something together." He looked down at the garden, considering my words. "I don't know, Jason. I'm just used to things being a certain way. I don't mind the changes, but I guess I'm not sure what all these changes mean for the long run." I could understand that. Change was never easy. It took time, and it was never without its bumps. But I wasn't going to let people like Linda or anyone else drag us back to the way things were. "What they mean, John, is that Willowbrook is ours now," I said. "It's not about rules and regulations. It's about us. We get to decide what our future looks like. And I promise you, it's going to be a future where we all have a say, where we're all working together to make this a place we can be proud of." He didn't answer right away, but after a few moments, he nodded. "I guess I can get behind that." We stood there for a moment, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees filling the silence. It wasn't an easy conversation, but I felt like we had taken a step in the right direction. As I walked away, I realized that Willowbrook was becoming more than just a neighborhood to me. It was a symbol of something bigger, something that showed what could happen when people stopped being afraid of change and started working together to build something better. And as for Linda, well, I had no doubt that she'd be watching from the sidelines, waiting for the day when she could try to reclaim her lost control. But I wasn't worried. Willowbrook was stronger now than it had ever been, and as long as I was here, no one was taking that away. It had been a few months since the conversation with John, and Willowbrook Estates was beginning to feel like a real community. The changes I had made were now deeply embedded in the neighborhood's fabric, and more people were starting to embrace the freedom that came with living without the heavy hand of the old HOA. The park was always busy with kids playing, families gardening, and neighbors chatting over their fences. It was everything I had hoped for when I decided to take control. But not everyone was happy. There were still some holdouts, people who weren't sure how to adjust to the new way of living. Most of them were quiet, but I could still feel their eyes on me, like they were waiting for me to slip up or make a mistake. I didn't let it bother me. I knew I was doing the right thing. One Saturday afternoon, as I was walking my dog through the neighborhood, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in a while. It was Terry, the retired schoolteacher who had been one of the first people to welcome me to Willowbrook when I moved in. "Hey, Terry," I said with a smile. "How's it going?" She smiled back, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Oh, you know," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure no one else was listening. "Things are fine, but I've been hearing some things." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of things?" "Oh, just rumors," she said, her voice lowering. "Some people think you've changed too much. They miss the old days when the rules were clear and things were more orderly." I sighed. It was the same issue again. Some people just didn't like change. "Terry," I said, my voice steady but kind, "I get it. Change is hard for some people. But the old rules didn't work. They didn't make anyone happy. All they did was control people. Willowbrook wasn't a community. It was a prison of rules." Terry nodded slowly, but her face showed that she wasn't entirely convinced. "I understand, Jason," she said, "but there's something comforting about knowing where you stand. You know? It was predictable." I thought about that for a moment. Predictable. That was the word people like Terry used when they talked about the old HOA. It wasn't that they liked the rules. They just liked knowing that everything was under control, even if that control meant stifling creativity and freedom. "I know it's been a big adjustment," I said, "but things are better now. People can breathe. They can do what they want without fear of being fined for every little thing. And you know what? The community is better for it. People are talking to each other more. They're getting involved in projects. It's about giving people the chance to live, not just follow someone's idea of what life should look like." Terry was quiet for a moment, looking down at the ground. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes softening. "I suppose you're right," she said. "It's just, well, I've lived here a long time. Change is hard. But maybe you're right. Maybe this is for the better." I smiled at her, feeling a sense of relief. "It's not easy, Terry, but it's worth it. Trust me, this is just the beginning." As I continued my walk, I could feel the weight of the conversation lift off my shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy to change everyone's mind, but the more people like Terry started to see the benefits of what I was doing, the more I realized I was on the right path. Willowbrook wasn't perfect yet, but it was becoming something special, and I was proud of that. The next few months brought more changes, more improvements to the neighborhood. People started to take ownership of their homes, their yards, and their community. It was no longer about following a set of rules. It was about working together to build something better. As I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sunset over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but smile. I had done it. I had turned Willowbrook Estates into a place people could be proud of. The past was behind us, and the future was bright. It had been a year since I had taken control of Willowbrook Estates, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride every time I walked through the neighborhood. The transformation had been nothing short of remarkable. People who had once felt like outsiders in their own community were now coming together, working toward a common goal. I watched families sitting together in the park, children playing without fear of being scolded by some HOA enforcer, and neighbors sharing their ideas about new improvements for the neighborhood. It was a place where people were free to live their lives, and it was becoming something special. Yet, there were still those who couldn't shake off the past. John, Terry, and a few others had slowly started to embrace the changes, but some were still hesitant. They liked the idea of freedom, but missed the order that came with the old HOA system. I could see it in their eyes during community meetings, the unease that lingered in the air. They weren't sure what to make of this new way of life, this open, community-driven space where everyone had a say. It wasn't easy to let go of years of living under the strict rules of the old HOA. But I knew that the longer I stayed the course, the more people would see the benefits. I decided to hold another community meeting, this time not to announce any new changes, but to hear from everyone about what they thought Willowbrook needed next. It was time to take the pulse of the neighborhood, to see if we had come far enough or if there were still unresolved issues. As I stood in front of the group, I noticed how much more comfortable everyone seemed. No longer was the room filled with distrust. People were engaged, smiling, and even laughing together. There was a genuine sense of excitement in the air. I took a deep breath, ready to address the group. We've come a long way, but this is just the beginning, I said. Willowbrook Estates is ours now. We've shaped it into something beautiful, but we can make it even better. What do you want to see happen next? This neighborhood is as much yours as it is mine, so your opinions matter. I watched as people raised their hands, eager to share their ideas. Some wanted more green spaces, some wanted new recreational areas, and others suggested starting a community volunteer program. Each idea was met with excitement and support, and I realized that this was the true strength of Willowbrook, people working together for the greater good. At the end of the meeting, we had a list of new projects to tackle, but what struck me the most wasn't the list itself. It was the spirit of collaboration that had blossomed among the residents. They were no longer just individuals living in a neighborhood. They were a community, united by a shared vision. As I left the meeting, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in a long time. The work I had put into transforming Willowbrook Estates wasn't just about building parks or removing fines. It was about creating a space where people could thrive, where they could feel like they belonged. It wasn't perfect, and there would always be challenges, but we had built something real, something sustainable. Willowbrook was a place of freedom, of opportunity, and of hope. And as I walked back to my house, I knew that this was just the beginning. The future was wide open, and together, we would continue to shape it.